No one knew that deep in the burning heart of Redstone Canyons, a lone ranger was fighting for his life. Wyatt Colton, a man who had spent 20 years protecting the desert's wild soul, now dangled helplessly from a searing cliff. Betrayed, beaten, and left to die by poachers. No backup, no way out. Just the blistering sun, and 4 K9 heroes who would defy the impossible. What happened next will leave you speechless. The sun blazed down like molten gold over Redstone Canyons, a jagged landscape carved into towering cliffs and sprawling sands just beyond the sleepy town of Yuma, Arizona. It was mid-July, and the desert had become an unforgiving furnace. Heat waves shimmered above the cracked earth, and every breath felt like inhaling fire. The winds, usually a soft whisper through the canyons, had turned into sharp gusts that scraped the skin raw. The sky was a brutal, endless blue without mercy, without a single cloud to offer shade. And somewhere amidst the labyrinth of stone and dust, a man was losing his fight against death. Wyatt Colton, a veteran ranger of Redstone Preserve, hung precariously from the sheer face of a burning cliff. 40 years old and 6 feet tall, Wyatt was the kind of man who seemed carved from the very rock he guarded, lean, rugged, and built for endurance. His face, usually stoic and unreadable, was now twisted in pain, dark brown eyes squinting against the relentless sun. His short brown hair clung to his forehead in sweaty clumps, and his uniform, an olive green tactical ranger suit, was stained with blood, dust, and desperation. Wyatt had given 2 decades of his life to protecting these lands, nursing wounded eagles back to flight and dragging lost hikers out of flash floods. But none of that mattered now. Rough rope bound his arms savagely behind his back, digging into flesh rubbed raw by struggle, suspending him a dozen feet above the canyon floor. One misstep, one shift of weight, and gravity would do the rest. Above him, 3 figures in black clothing and mirrored sunglasses watched with a cruel detachment. They were poachers, men who trafficked in the rare and endangered creatures that clung to life in the desert's harsher corners. Desert lynxes, golden eagles, even the elusive silver-scaled lizards that fetched fortunes on the black market. Their leader, Cole Mathis, stood at the edge, his silhouette jagged against the sun. Mathis was in his late 30s, whip-thin, with leathery skin and restless, darting eyes. Once a ranger himself, he had turned bitter after being discharged for misconduct years ago. That betrayal had fermented inside him into a deep hatred for everything the Preserve stood for. His 2 companions, younger but no less vicious, were silent shadows behind him, barely distinguishable except for the casual violence in their body language. "Let the desert finish him," Mathis said without emotion, tightening the knot once more before spitting onto the rock. His voice was a rasp, burned rough by years of sun and smoke. "No one's coming for you, Ranger boy." They turned away, their boots scuffing the dust as they vanished into the twisting canyons. Wyatt gritted his teeth, a low growl of frustration escaping him. His wrists throbbed, his shoulders screamed, and the sun hammered down mercilessly. He tried to wedge his boot into a crack for support, but the stone was crumbling, the rope fraying dangerously under the heat. His breath came in shallow gasps. In this wilderness, isolated and unforgiving, he was as good as invisible, except to one. Miles away, across the shimmering desert plain, Ash lifted his head. Ash was no ordinary dog. 7 years old, a seasoned German shepherd with a thick coat, dusted in gray and black like embers from an ancient fire, Ash was the acknowledged leader of the Redstone K9 unit. His amber eyes held a fierce intelligence, and there was a weight to his posture, a quiet authority that commanded respect from humans and dogs alike. His muzzle bore a small scar above the left eye, a remnant from a wildfire rescue 3 years earlier, and his left ear had a slight crinkle at the tip, giving him a permanent look of cautious calculation. Ash had spent years honing his instincts on the rugged trails of Redstone, untracking lost hikers, flushing out smugglers, and sensing danger where others saw none. Today had begun like any other. Officer Sam Prescott, Ash's handler and partner, was running a late-morning search and rescue drill just south of the canyon's basin. Sam, 35, tall and broad-shouldered, carried the easy strength of a man who spent more time under open skies than beneath a roof. His sandy blonde hair was cropped short under a sweat-stained cap, and his tanned face often wore an easygoing grin that masked the deeper scars underneath. A tragedy years ago when he lost his younger brother during a hiking trip, a loss that had tethered Sam's heart forever to the idea of never leaving anyone behind. With Sam today were three other K9s, each remarkable in their own right. Blaze, a high-strung 3-year-old German shepherd, had a coat streaked with gold and a spirit that danced constantly at the edge of reckless brilliance. He was the quickest of the team, sharp-nosed and twitchy, a streak of fire barely contained. Dusty, smaller and wirier, sported a dusty tan coat that blended perfectly with the desert sands. At 2 years old, Dusty was the most agile, a scrappy climber who could slip into ravines and under rock ledges where others couldn't reach. Flint, the powerhouse of the group, was the oldest after Ash, with a barrel chest and thick muscles that rippled under his black and tan fur. At 6 years old, Flint was a patient sentinel, a dog who needed only one command to turn into an unstoppable force. They had been halfway through a scent line exercise when Ash froze, his ears pinned forward, nostrils flaring wide. Sam, noticing the sudden shift, dropped his easy grin. "Ash? What is it, boy?" Ash didn't answer, of course. Instead, he bolted, silent, decisive, a gray arrow slicing through the dust. Sam's heart kicked hard into his ribs. He had seen Ash react like this only twice before. Once when a hiker had fallen into a dry well, and once when a child had been swept downriver during a storm. Both times, Ash had been right. Both times, lives had hung in the balance. Without hesitation, Sam shouted, "Blaze, Dusty, Flint, go!" And the three dogs tore after Ash without a second glance. Slinging his gear over his back, Sam sprinted into the choking heat, every nerve alive with urgency. The world blurred into flashes of red rock and blistering sand as they raced against time. Ash's form, lithe and sure, led the charge through winding gullies and up steep inclines. Blaze and Dusty flanked him like quicksilver, while Flint's heavy strides thundered behind. Sam struggled to keep pace, the dry air clawing at his throat. Ash knew. Somehow, some way, he knew. By sheer instinct, Ash led the entire unit away from their drills, charging headlong into a rescue mission that would defy fate. The sun bore down harder with every step, turning the landscape into a living kiln. Ash's paws barely seemed to touch the ground as he darted forward, nose to the wind, nostrils flaring with concentration. He caught the scent again, a faint metallic tang that didn't belong to stone or sand. It was blood, thin and almost cooked by the heat, carried in wisps across the vast emptiness. His amber eyes sharpened, locking onto an invisible trail, and he barked once, low and clipped, a signal to his team. Sam Prescott tightened his grip on the rescue harness strapped across his back. Sweat streamed down his temples, soaking into the collar of his tan tactical uniform, but he ignored the discomfort. Years of working side by side with Ash had taught him one immutable truth. When Ash signaled danger, you listened. Without hesitation, Sam waved the other dogs forward. "Go with him," he commanded, his voice cutting through the dry air. Blaze responded instantly, springing ahead with the raw, impatient energy that always seemed to crackle around his golden-streaked coat. His body was sleek, leaner than the others, and built for speed. Blaze's sharp nose dipped lower, searching for fresher signs, every fiber of his being tuned to urgency. Meanwhile, Dusty veered off to the right, his lighter, sand-colored frame almost disappearing against the rocky dunes. At just 2 years old, Dusty was small but wiry, with a narrow snout perfect for squeezing into tight cracks and ravines. His specialty was terrain others couldn't navigate, and even now, his quick darting movements showed he was already searching for a safer route through the craggy outcrops that lay ahead. Flint, ever the steady giant, plodded leftward in a wide arc, his massive shoulders rolling under his thick coat. At 6 years old, Flint was all muscle and endurance, built not for speed, but for power. He sniffed methodically at the ground, keeping an eye out for anything useful, a length of rope, a fallen tool, even a natural anchor point. They would need it soon. Sam pressed forward behind them, his breathing labored, his boots sliding slightly on the loose sand. The canyon yawned ahead, fractured and twisting, a maze of dead ends and sheer drops. In the distance, the cliffs loomed, and somewhere hidden against the blazing rock, Wyatt Colton was fighting to hold on to life. Miles away at Redstone Outpost, a lone figure glanced up from a dusty map, her brow furrowing. Alara Monroe was not the type to sit idle. At 32, with a lean build hardened by years of desert fieldwork, she was a rare blend of intellectual and survivor. Her chestnut hair, usually braided tight against the desert winds, had already come loose in wisps around her sunburned cheeks. Her eyes, an intense shade of green, missed very little. As the resident environmental biologist assigned to Redstone Canyons, Alara had grown suspicious when the early morning radio check-in with Wyatt went unanswered. She trusted her instincts. Instincts sharpened long ago during an earthquake in Nevada, where she'd been trapped for 3 days before rescuers found her. Since then, silence in the wild always rang louder in her mind than any cry for help. Slinging a canvas bag over her shoulder, filled with basic first aid and climbing gear, she headed for her battered old Jeep without waiting for permission. She didn't know yet what was wrong, but she knew something was. Back in the desert, Ash moved like a ghost. His keen senses pulled him away from the more obvious trails into a narrow defile where the rocks shimmered with trapped heat. Sam hesitated at the entrance, narrowing his eyes. It was a risky path, a death trap in the wrong circumstances, but Ash showed no fear. He barked once, insistently. Sam followed without a word, trusting the dog more than his own tired legs. As they threaded through the narrow corridor of stone, Blaze barked sharply from up ahead. Sam squinted and saw it. A smear of red against the ochre rock, half dried and barely visible unless you knew exactly what to look for. Blood. Not much, but enough. Sam's heart kicked into overdrive. They were close. "Good boy, Blaze," he called hoarsely. The young shepherd wagged his tail once, but didn't break stride, veering downhill along a shallow gully choked with loose gravel. Dusty, scrambling over the rocks above, yipped excitedly as he found another broken trail, scraps of Wyatt's torn green uniform snagged against a thorny bush. Flint, still prowling methodically, found a piece of old climbing rope, half buried in the sand. It was frayed and sun-bleached, but looked strong enough for emergency use. Sam's mind raced. They could use that rope if it came to rigging a rescue. Every small discovery fueled their desperate momentum. Above them, the sun dipped slightly westward, but offered no relief. If anything, the heat deepened, baking the stones until they radiated an invisible, oppressive force. Sam knew Wyatt didn't have much longer. Exposure could kill faster than any wound, and from the looks of the blood trail, Wyatt had already suffered enough. Sam keyed his radio. "Prescott to outpost. We have signs, visual confirmation of blood trail, torn uniform, moving northeast along Ridge 4 toward the south wall. Request immediate backup and medevac team." A burst of static answered him. The cliffs interfered with the signal, breaking his call into fragmented syllables. Sam swore under his breath, but didn't waste time trying again. They had to move. Faster. Harder. He looked down at Ash, who had paused, his nose pressed into the ground. The dog growled low, not in threat, but in fierce urgency. Ash turned his head toward Sam, eyes burning with silent command. They had to go. Now. By sheer instinct, Ash led the entire unit away from their drills, charging headlong into a rescue mission that would defy fate. The desert's breath was a furnace as Sam Prescott crested the final ridge, heart hammering painfully against his ribs. Every footstep sank into the shifting red sand, and even the rocks beneath seemed too hot to touch. Ahead, the canyon opened like a yawning mouth, and Sam stumbled to a halt, bile rising in his throat at the sight laid out before him. Wyatt Colton hung from a crude arrangement of fraying rope, his body suspended against the sheer face of the cliff, swaying slightly with the gusting wind. His skin was scorched a deep angry red, blistered and cracked, and his face, usually so composed and weathered, was slack and frighteningly pale. His lips were cracked open, whispering sounds too faint to hear, his chest rising and falling in uneven, labored rhythm. If the rope frayed just a little more, if the rock shifted, Wyatt would be gone in an instant. Ash, his coat dusted with sand and sweat, released a low, guttural growl that vibrated deep in his chest. His body stiffened with singular focus, ears pinned, tail rigid. He didn't bark, he commanded. Without hesitation, Flint lumbered forward, his powerful frame absorbing the strain as he positioned himself at the base of the exposed rope, gripping it gently but firmly in his strong jaws. Flint's thick neck muscles bunched as he braced himself, leaning his massive weight backward to counterbalance Wyatt's swaying. The rope held, barely. Sam ripped open the side pouch of his rescue kit, fingers fumbling against the cracked leather. He extracted a coil of newer, stronger rope and a set of carabiners, heart pounding so loudly it seemed to drown out the desert winds. Meanwhile, Dusty, lighter and quicker, scrambled along the nearby rocks, paws kicking up a spray of dust as he searched frantically. The young shepherd's ears twitched sharply when he spotted something, a length of dried climbing vine trailing from a half-buried root system wedged into a crevice nearby. It wasn't ideal, but it was strong and flexible enough to serve as an emergency tether. Sam didn't waste a breath. "Good boy, Dusty," he gasped, scrambling across the uneven ground to retrieve it. Ash stayed close to Sam's side, muscles taut, eyes locked unwaveringly on Wyatt, as if willing the man to stay alive just a few moments longer. Sweat poured down Sam's back as he secured one end of the stronger rope around a nearby stone outcropping, solid and jagged enough to serve as a makeshift anchor. He tossed the loose end carefully toward Wyatt, praying his aim was true. The rope grazed Wyatt's outstretched arm, but fell short. Ash moved first. In a feat of instinctual brilliance, he nudged the loose end of the rope with his nose, barking sharply to snap Wyatt from the haze of unconsciousness. Wyatt's swollen eyelids fluttered weakly. Somewhere in the fog of pain, the signal reached him. Summoning strength that seemed impossible, Wyatt shifted his body slightly, fingers fumbling for the rope dangling so tantalizingly close. It took 3 agonizing tries before his bleeding fingers closed around it. "Hang on, Wyatt! You've got this!" Sam yelled hoarsely, already threading the carabiner along the second line, ready to clip Wyatt into a safer, stronger hold. His hands worked methodically, movements honed by countless drills, though none had ever been under stakes quite like these. Every second counted. The sun had dropped marginally in the sky, but its heat was still merciless, searing into skin, bleaching the rocks into a blinding glare. Wyatt's body jerked as another gust of desert wind howled up the canyon, and Flint dug his paws deeper into the sand, letting out a low whine of exertion as he held firm. At that critical moment, another figure stumbled into view across the ridge. Ilara Monroe, her jeans torn at the knees from scrambling across the rocks, her face flushed with heat and determination. Slinging her gear bag from her shoulder, she took in the situation at a glance with those piercing green eyes of hers, immediately reading the desperate tableau before her. Ilara was a woman molded by adversity. Years of working in remote, hostile environments had left her lean and sun-weathered, but her spirit remained unbroken, fierce in its quiet intensity. Without waiting for instructions, Ilara dropped to her knees beside Sam, pulling out a roll of extra webbing and a compact rescue pulley system from her bag. "I've got backup gear," she shouted over the wind. Her voice was steady, confident, cutting through the chaos like a lifeline. Sam nodded tightly. "Good. Anchor that to the second outcrop, 3 feet to your left." Ilara moved with swift precision, her lean arms braced against the stone as she clipped the webbing into place, working as if she'd done it 1,000 times before. Together, they coordinated the setup. Sam fed the rope down to Wyatt, now slightly more alert, while Ilara secured the secondary pulleys to redirect the strain away from Flint, whose massive shoulders quivered under the burden. Ash and Dusty moved like living extensions of the team, Ash barking soft, urgent commands, while Dusty darted between positions, eyes bright with focus. The entire desert seemed to hold its breath. "Come on, Wyatt, just a little more," Sam muttered under his breath as he clipped the carabiner onto Wyatt's makeshift harness. Wyatt, ever the stubborn survivor, summoned one last effort, locking the rope around his body. Sam, Ilara, and the dogs pulled together as one living machine. Muscles burned, sweat poured, the cliff face tore at boots and paws alike. Inch by agonizing inch, Wyatt rose. Finally, with a final, straining heave, Sam and Ilara pulled Wyatt over the lip of the canyon's edge. He collapsed onto the burning stone, gasping, his body a trembling wreck of sunburns, bruises, and torn flesh, but alive. Flint released the tension on the rope and flopped heavily onto his side, sides heaving. Dusty bounded over to lick Wyatt's blistered hands, tail thudding the ground in relieved rhythm. Ash stood over Wyatt protectively, nose brushing against the ranger's cheek in a rare, tender gesture. Sam dropped to one knee beside Wyatt, checking his vitals quickly, still breathing, still fighting. Relief threatened to buckle his legs. Alara passed him a canteen wordlessly, and together they trickled water into Wyatt's cracked lips. Wyatt coughed weakly, eyes fluttering open enough to meet Sam's gaze, and then ashes. A soft, croaked whisper escaped his throat. "Good boys, good boys." The moment hung suspended in the blazing desert light, a fragile, victorious thread spun from trust, loyalty, and stubborn human and canine will. The desert wind shifted as Alara Monroe guided her aging Jeep along the dusty trail that snaked through the southern boundary of Redstone Canyons. The sun hung lower now, a bloated orb of orange smeared against the empty sky, but its heat still bled into everything it touched. The tires crunched over broken rock and loose sand, each jolt rattling the bottles and climbing gear in the back seat. Alara gripped the steering wheel tighter, a gnawing worry growing with every mile. She had spent the better part of the afternoon conducting a solo survey of drought-resistant flora along the southern ridges. Her work as an environmental biologist often required days of isolation in the harsh wilderness, but something had pulled at her gut when her radio checks with the outpost had gone unanswered. At 32, Alara was not a woman easily rattled. Tall and athletic, with a wiry strength born from years under open skies, she wore her long chestnut hair in a practical braid down her back. Her skin was sun-kissed and freckled, her face angular but softened by expressive green eyes that missed nothing. Friends often described her as relentless, a trait forged after surviving a landslide during a research expedition in her early 20s, an accident that had taught her firsthand how thin the line between life and death could be when the wilderness turned against you. As the canyon narrowed ahead, she slowed the vehicle, eyes scanning the horizon. That's when she saw them. 4 dogs, their bodies low and tense, moving with precision across the rocks. No casual exploration. No aimless wandering. They were on a mission, laser-focused. And trailing behind them, struggling against the oppressive heat, was a man she recognized instantly. Sam Prescott, the K-9 unit's lead trainer, hunched forward with grim determination. Alarm bells blared in Alara's mind. She pulled over sharply, grabbed her field pack, and sprinted toward them without hesitation. By the time she reached the edge of the cliff, the scene before her was one of pure, raw desperation. Sam and the dogs were fighting a losing battle against gravity and time, their bodies strained in a delicate dance to rescue another man, Wyatt Colton, who was barely clinging to existence as he dangled from the crumbling ledge. Sam looked up at her arrival, relief flashing briefly across his dust-smeared face. His sandy blonde hair was matted to his forehead, his uniform streaked with sweat and dirt. "We need another anchor," he shouted, voice hoarse. "Rope's not going to hold much longer." Without missing a beat, Alara threw down her bag and yanked out a roll of backup webbing and a portable pulley system. Her hands worked quickly, deftly, years of field rescues lending a calm efficiency to her movements. She found a sturdy stone outcropping a few feet to the side, thick and jagged, perfect for bearing load. Looping the webbing around it, she secured it tightly, then clipped the pulley into place. "Ready?" she called out. Together with Sam, she fed a new line down toward Wyatt. Dusty, the smallest shepherd with a coat almost blending into the desert sand, darted to her side to assist, pawing at the loose coil of rope with eager whines, sensing the urgency without needing a command. Flint, the brute force of the group, braced himself anew, muscles trembling under his thick black and tan coat, but refusing to yield. Blaze, always the fastest, patrolled the perimeter, his sharp eyes scanning for any shifts in the unstable rocks above. As they coordinated the rescue, Ash remained closest to Wyatt, the grizzled leader of the K-9S, with his scarred ear and intense amber gaze, crouched low, his nose inches from Wyatt's face, offering silent reassurance. It was Ash who barked sharply when Wyatt's fingers began slipping, snapping Sam and Alara back into desperate motion. Alara adjusted the angle of the pulley to counterbalance the tension, while Sam leaned his full weight into the line, voice ragged as he encouraged Wyatt. "Hold on, buddy! Almost there!" Inch by painful inch, they pulled Wyatt upward. Alara's muscles burned from the effort, her palms raw against the rope, but she didn't slow. When finally Wyatt's limp form crested the edge, Flint lunged forward to grab the loose end of the harness in his teeth, helping drag the wounded ranger fully onto the plateau. Wyatt collapsed onto the sun-baked stone, his breath shallow but blessedly steady. His uniform was shredded, skin blistered in angry red patches where the sun had ravaged him. Alara knelt quickly beside Sam, pulling a canteen from her pack. Together they trickled precious water past Wyatt's cracked lips, careful not to overwhelm his battered system. Wyatt's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding their brown depths before recognition slowly dawned. He rasped a broken whisper. "Dogs. Good boys." Ash leaned in, resting his head lightly against Wyatt's chest, as if claiming responsibility for every moment that had kept him alive. Sam sat back on his heels, exhaling shakily. Alara caught his eye and gave a brief, weary smile, two strangers thrown together by a disaster neither had planned for, but bound now by the fragile life they had fought to reclaim from the jaws of the desert. The wind shifted again, cooler now as twilight approached, and for a moment the harsh wilderness seemed to pause in reverence. Around them, the red stones loomed high and silent, guardians of a miracle hard won through trust, instinct, and stubborn, relentless hope. The world came back to Wyatt Colton in fragments, sounds, smells, then finally, pain. It seared through every nerve ending like wildfire, radiating out from his sunburnt shoulders and raw, battered wrists. He inhaled sharply, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic, dust, and something deeper, warmth, the kind that didn't come from the sun, but from the living, breathing beings nearby. His heavy eyelids fluttered open, revealing the dim interior of a temporary rescue tent, canvas walls rippling gently in the cool evening breeze. A single battery-powered lantern cast a weak glow, illuminating the rough cot he lay on and the few makeshift medical supplies stacked on a folding table nearby. Wyatt tried to sit up, but a firm weight on his chest stopped him. He blinked blearily down and found Ash. The older German shepherd rested his head lightly across Wyatt's ribs, amber eyes half-lidded but alert. Around the cot, the rest of the K9 unit had formed a silent perimeter. Blaze lay curled tightly near Wyatt's feet, his golden coat rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. Dusty, ever the restless one, sat upright at the head of the cot, his ears swiveling at every sound outside the tent. Flint, the stoic giant, stretched out along the tent's entrance, his bulk forming a living barricade against any unseen threat. The sight struck Wyatt harder than any blow he had taken over the past 2 days. A lump rose in his throat, too large to swallow, and moisture blurred the edges of his vision. These 4 creatures, silent, tireless, loyal, had refused to leave him even after the immediate danger had passed. In their unwavering watchfulness, Wyatt saw something he thought he had lost years ago: unconditional trust. He shifted slightly, grimacing as his burned skin protested. Ash lifted his head immediately, concern flashing in his eyes. Wyatt managed a hoarse chuckle, barely more than a breath. "I'm still here, boy," he rasped. His voice was a wreck, scraped raw by dehydration and exhaustion, but the sound seemed to comfort the dogs. Blaze stirred, thumping his tail once against the cot frame. Dusty edged closer, nose twitching as he inspected Wyatt's bandaged hands. Even Flint gave a soft, approving huff without moving from his post. The tent flap rustled, and Alara Monroe ducked inside carrying a battered metal tray. She was wearing a loose desert jacket now, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms freckled from years in the sun. Her practical braid had frayed almost completely, strands sticking to her flushed cheeks. She moved with the sure-footed grace of someone used to unstable terrain, and when her green eyes landed on Wyatt, her whole face softened. "You're awake," she said, a smile breaking through the fatigue in her voice. "Good. Thought we were going to have to slap you awake eventually?" She set the tray down on the table and pulled a small stool closer to the cot, sitting down with a sigh that spoke of too many miles walked and too little rest. Behind her, Sam Prescott entered, carrying a fresh canteen and a second aid kit. His sandy hair was flattened against his scalp, and a fresh scrape marked one tanned cheekbone. Despite the grime and weariness, Sam's usual easygoing grin flickered to life at the sight of Wyatt conscious. "You look like hell, Ranger," Sam said lightly, crouching down to eye level. "But I've seen worse. You're tough. You'll pull through." Sam had always been the kind of man who spoke with the same ease to dogs and people alike, a natural bridge between two worlds. His faith in survival wasn't naive. It was a fierce, weathered thing, carved out of years spent dragging people back from the brink. Wyatt tried to speak, but the words tangled in his dry throat. Sam uncapped the canteen and helped him sip carefully, the cool water sliding down in blessed relief. After a few more attempts, Wyatt managed a rough whisper. "How long?" Alara glanced at her watch, the strap frayed and worn. "You've been out about 4 hours, long enough for us to set up this station, patch you up, and alert Medivac. They're sending a chopper at first light." She leaned forward, her green eyes sharpening. "You're lucky. Another hour on that cliff, and we wouldn't be having this conversation." Wyatt closed his eyes briefly. The images flooded back, the searing sun, the coarse rope, the mocking laughter of the poachers. He felt the nausea rise, but Ash's warm presence grounded him. He opened his eyes again and found 4 pairs of canine eyes locked on him with unwavering focus. "They didn't leave me," Wyatt murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "No," Sam said quietly. "They didn't. Wouldn't, even if we tried to pull them away." A heavy silence settled, rich with meaning. In a place where men had abandoned him for greed, where the desert itself had tried to claim him, these animals had refused to surrender. Wyatt had known loyalty in his life, his family, his fellow rangers, but none so raw, so immediate as this. Outside, the desert night thickened. Stars began to prick the darkening sky, their cold light washing the red stones in pale silver. The temperature dropped sharply, and the canvas walls of the tent rippled with each gust of cool wind. Flint shifted at the doorway, nose lifting to scent the changing air. Dusty laid his head carefully across Wyatt's uninjured arm, while Blaze edged closer to rest against his boots. Wyatt let his head fall back against the thin pillow, exhaustion tugging at his battered body. Yet, for the first time since he had been dragged into this nightmare, a fragile warmth bloomed in his chest. Not the burning of the sun, not the tearing ache of wounds, but something smaller, steadier. Hope. Born not from promises or grand speeches, but from the simple, silent vow written in the patient eyes of 4 dogs who had refused to let him fall. Night deepened over Redstone Canyons, the once blazing desert now wrapped in a blanket of chill. Inside the temporary rescue station, Wyatt Colton dozed fitfully, his body recovering in small increments from the ordeal, his mind drifting in and out of restless dreams. The lanterns flickered against the tent walls as gusts of cold wind whispered through the camp, carrying with them scents of dust, dry sagebrush, and something else. Something sharper, metallic, unsettling. Outside the tent, Sam Prescott moved silently through the rocks, his flashlight beam cutting narrow paths through the shadows. Ash padded beside him, his powerful frame alert and coiled with tension. Sam trusted Ash's instincts more than his own at times like these. The dog's ears were pinned forward, every muscle taut, as if he could feel the disturbance rippling through the ground itself. They hadn't expected trouble, not after the rescue. But Sam had learned long ago that danger in the desert rarely announced itself. It crept. It lingered. It waited for exhaustion to dull the senses. Earlier that evening, as Sam had done a perimeter sweep, Ash had frozen, nose lifted to the wind, body rigid. That single moment had unraveled the fragile peace of the camp. Sam had knelt by the dog, trusting him, and caught the faint but undeniable scent. Gun oil, human sweat, and old blood. Not from their rescue, but fresher, nearby. Now, moving carefully among the scattered boulders and low, thorny brush, Sam found the first sign. A snare trap, partially hidden beneath a thin layer of sand, its wire glinting under his light. Ash growled softly at his side, a low, warning vibration. Sam bent down, inspecting it closer. The trap was new, set no more than a few hours ago. Designed not for small game, but something larger. Perhaps even one of the dogs. Sam straightened, heart sinking. "They're still here," he whispered, more to Ash than to himself. Meanwhile, Elara Monroe had remained at the station, tending to Wyatt with calm efficiency. She had stripped off her heavy jacket, now wearing only a faded gray t-shirt and tactical cargo pants, her boots dusty and scuffed. Her green eyes, normally observant but kind, were hard tonight, flickering constantly to the dark edges of camp as she bandaged Wyatt's wounds and refreshed his IV drip. Her instincts, sharpened from years of surviving in remote, lawless territories, screamed that something was wrong. Finishing her work on Wyatt, she stood and pulled a compact satellite phone from her pack. The device was old, scratched, but reliable. She tried to reach the main ranger station. No response. The signal crackled, then cut into static. Alara frowned deeply. Satellite interference could happen naturally in Redstone's canyons, but tonight it felt deliberate. The tent flap stirred, and Dusty slinked in, the small shepherd's sandy coat blending almost invisibly with the canvas. He whined softly, circling the cot where Wyatt lay, before sitting near the entrance, staring intently outward. Not sleeping, not resting, watching. Across camp, Blaze and Flint moved in quiet patrols. Blaze, with his lean body and golden-streaked fur, zipped from shadow to shadow, his bright eyes scanning every rock and crevice. Flint, heavier and more methodical, lumbered along the perimeter, his breath misting in the cold air, the heavy weight of duty resting on his broad shoulders. Sam returned 20 minutes later, face grim. Alara met him halfway between the tents, their voices low. "They're close," he muttered, "setting traps. Probably watching us right now." Alara's jaw tightened. She slipped the satellite phone into her belt. "If they're smart, they're waiting for the right moment. We're tired, vulnerable. They'll want to finish what they started." Sam looked toward Wyatt's tent, where the faint shadows of the dogs moved steadily. His fists clenched unconsciously. "Not while we're still breathing." Alara nodded once, her expression hard as the stones under their boots. "We need to find them before they find us." At that moment, Ash stiffened at Sam's side, his nose twitching. Without a sound, he moved forward, leading them toward the northern slope of the small plateau where they had made camp. There, nestled between two boulders, was something new. A makeshift shelter, no more than a few tarps strung across spindly branches, but unmistakably human. Sam's flashlight swept over it. Backpacks, empty water jugs, a scoped rifle half buried in the sand. And most telling of all, a pile of half-burned maps, the charred edges still smoldering faintly. He stepped closer, careful not to disturb the ground, and peered at what remained. Redstone Preserve's northern boundaries were marked, routes highlighted, observation points circled in thick red pen. "They're planning something big," Alara murmured behind him, voice tight. "Not just small game, land grabs, smuggling, maybe worse." Sam crouched, picking up a scrap of paper that had escaped the fire. A rough list, coordinates, supply drops, numbers of men. His stomach twisted. They weren't just a few desperate poachers. This was organized, funded, dangerous. Ash growled again, ears pinned flat, body low to the ground. From the corner of his eye, Sam caught movement, a flicker of shadow against the rocks above. Someone was watching. He turned to Alara. "Get back to camp, quietly. Wake Wyatt if you have to. Get everyone ready to move." "What about you?" she asked, tension flashing across her freckled features. "I'll draw their attention." Sam's voice was flat, the tone of a man who had already accepted the risk. Alara hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded. She pulled a small battered revolver from her backpack, an old .38 special she kept for emergencies, and slipped away into the darkness, Dusty at her heels. Sam turned back to Ash. "Ready, boy?" Ash responded with a low bark, teeth flashing in the dim light. They moved as one, disappearing into the broken landscape, drawing the eyes of the predators out into the open. Back at camp, Wyatt stirred restlessly, as if sensing the shift in the wind. Blaze paced at the foot of his cot, while Flint positioned himself squarely between the tents and the open desert, shoulders squared for whatever was coming. A new battle was brewing under the endless desert sky. And this time, Wyatt Colton swore silently, lying in the half-darkness as strength slowly returned to his battered body. This time, he would not let them win. The moon hung low over Redstone Canyons, a swollen crimson eye staring down upon the parched earth. Its light bled over the rocks and scrub, washing the landscape in eerie shades of rust and bone. The desert, normally silent at this hour, thrummed with tension so thick it seemed to vibrate in the marrow of every living thing. In the shallow basin where they had made their stand, Wyatt Colton, Sam Prescott, Alara Monroe, and the 4 K9 warriors prepared for war. Wyatt sat upright against a boulder, swathed in gauze and stitched wounds, a battered revolver resting across his lap. His strength had returned enough to keep him conscious and alert, though every muscle screamed protest. His dark brown eyes, once dulled by exhaustion, burned now with renewed fire, a stubborn refusal to yield. Beside him sat Dusty, the wiry young shepherd whose sand-colored coat blended almost perfectly with the dry scrub around them. Dusty's ears flicked nervously, his body a coil of readiness. Sam Prescott knelt a few yards away, speaking quietly into a battered handheld radio, trying to reach any nearby rangers or emergency backup. His tan uniform clung to him, soaked with sweat and streaked with dust. His usually relaxed expression had hardened into something sharp, focused. A man fully aware that survival tonight would depend on cunning more than force. At his side, Blaze stood taut and trembling with energy, his golden-streaked fur glinting under the blood moon, eager for action. Flint, the heavy stoic shepherd, took up position near the shallow ridge to the east, the ground almost vibrating under his slow, methodical movements. He was a wall of muscle and instinct, a living barricade against whatever approached. Ash, the oldest and wisest among them, prowled between the rocks like a silent sentinel. His scarred ear and silver-flecked coat marked him as a survivor of many battles, but his amber eyes tonight burned brighter than ever. Alara crouched close to Wyatt, checking his makeshift bandages one last time. Her practical braid was coming undone again, strands of chestnut hair plastered to her freckled forehead. She had holstered her revolver against her hip and carried a slim hunting knife sheathed across her lower back. Her green eyes, sharp and clear, swept the darkness, noting every movement in the shifting dunes beyond. The first shot split the night like a whip crack. Sam reacted instantly, dropping into a low crouch, motioning Wyatt and Alara to take cover. Blaze and Dusty bolted into position without a sound, while Flint and Ash moved to flank the camp's perimeter. From the darkness ahead, figures emerged. 5, 6, maybe more. Their shapes were blurry at first, then clearer as they moved under the moonlight. Men clad in desert camouflage, armed with rifles, shotguns, and crude homemade weapons. Their leader stood at the forefront, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a bushy black beard and cold, flat eyes. His name, as Sam would later learn, was Brock Halter, an ex-mercenary turned poacher, notorious along the Arizona border for his brutality. Brock was a bear of a man, easily 6'4", with thick arms and a neck corded with muscle. A jagged scar ran from the corner of his right eye down to his jaw, twisting his permanent sneer into something even crueler. He carried a semi-automatic rifle slung low, moving with the brutal confidence of someone used to being obeyed by fear alone. "Drop the weapons, Ranger!" Brock shouted, his voice booming across the basin. "This ain't your fight anymore. Walk away, and maybe you and your mutts get to live." Wyatt's fingers curled around the revolver instinctively. Sam shook his head once, eyes never leaving Brock. "You don't belong here," Sam called back. "Turn around while you still can." Brock laughed, a hollow, grating sound. "We own this land now. You're just corpses waiting for a grave." Without waiting for an answer, Brock raised his rifle. Before the first shot could crack, Ash moved. The old shepherd launched from the shadows with a speed that defied his age. He went straight for Brock, a blur of muscle and teeth, hitting the man squarely in the chest. Brock staggered backward, firing a wild shot into the night sky. Flint barreled into two of Brock's men at the flank, knocking one sprawling and sending the other's weapon skittering across the rocks. Blaze darted into the fray, swift as a desert wind, snapping at heels and hamstrings, sowing chaos among the attackers. Dusty, smaller but no less fierce, slipped behind enemy lines, using his size and speed to outmaneuver the gunmen. Alara, moving like a phantom through the rocks, flanked the disoriented poachers, cutting them off from retreat. She fired twice, clean warning shots into the ground, forcing them to rethink any ideas of retreat. Wyatt, despite his injuries, dragged himself into a better firing position. He waited, breath steady, until one of Brock's men broke from cover, then squeezed the trigger. The revolver roared, and the man dropped his weapon, howling in pain. In the chaos, Dusty stumbled across something. A crude cage hidden under a camouflaged tarp, shoved against the rocks. Inside were two young desert lynxes, their fur matted, eyes wide with terror. Nearby, more cages held rare reptiles, birds, even a battered juvenile antelope, all slated for black market trafficking. Dusty barked sharply, the sound cutting through the gunfire. Blaze heard and pivoted, racing to Dusty's side. Together they guarded the cages, teeth bared against anyone who dared approach. Sam used the distraction to tackle another gunman, wrestling the weapon from his grip and slamming him into the sand. Flint, meanwhile, pinned two more men down near the ridge, his jaws locked tight around a rifle stock. Ash and Brock rolled across the ground in a vicious tangle, man and beast evenly matched. Brock cursed, swinging a thick arm to throw Ash off, but the shepherd was relentless, teeth snapping closer and closer to the mercenary's throat. Brock finally slammed the butt of his rifle into Ash's side, staggering the dog momentarily. But it was enough. Sam was there in a flash, driving a knee into Brock's gut, forcing the air from his lungs and slamming him hard against the rocks. The fight drained from Brock all at once. Sam wrenched the rifle away and trained it on him, breathing hard. The battle was over. Alara gathered the wounded poachers with the help of Wyatt, who leaned heavily on a walking stick fashioned from a dead branch. The desert lynxes whimpered softly, but Dusty and Blaze stayed close, protective and watchful. Flint stood guard over the remaining prisoners, and Ash, bloody but unbroken, sat by Sam's side, his amber eyes sharp and unyielding. Under the red moon, in the ruined stillness of the desert, the protectors had prevailed. The dawn broke soft and golden over Redstone Canyons, chasing away the last vestiges of blood-red night. The sky bled slowly into lighter blues, brushing the jagged cliffs with warmth, and the desert, scarred but undefeated, breathed again. The battle was over. The echoes of gunfire and chaos had faded into memory, leaving behind a strange, solemn peace. Wyatt Colton sat on the low stone steps of the temporary command outpost, a thin blanket draped over his shoulders. His wounds still ached dully, reminders of how close death had pressed against him, but he welcomed the pain. It was proof he was alive. His dark eyes, deep-set and thoughtful, watched the horizon as if memorizing every shifting color of the sky. The battered revolver that had served him the night before rested quietly on the step beside him. His ranger badge, bent and scratched during the ordeal, still clung to his chest, stubborn like the man himself. Beside him, Ash lay with his head resting on Wyatt's boot, his scarred ear flicking occasionally at the soft hum of desert insects awakening to the day. Despite the stiffness in his movements and a small bandage wrapped around his flank, the old shepherd's amber eyes gleamed with unbreakable pride. Flint dozed a few feet away, his massive chest rising and falling like a slow drum beat, while Blaze and Dusty took turns patrolling the perimeter, still unwilling to fully relax even in victory. Inside the outpost tent, Alara Monroe finished a call on the backup satellite phone. She moved with a grace born not from fragility, but resilience. A woman whose every step had been carved from hardship. Her sun-freckled face was flushed with exhaustion, her braid fraying into wild strands down her back, but her green eyes sparked with a fierce energy. She jotted down a few notes, biting her lower lip, a nervous habit that surfaced only when she was about to make a life-altering decision. Across from her, Sam Prescott packed away the last of the emergency gear. He worked methodically, shoulders tense under the weight of unspoken choices. His tan uniform was stained and torn, but he moved like a man finally lifting the burden of guilt he had carried for too long. The guilt of every search that had ended too late, every life he hadn't saved. Today, though, there was redemption in the air. Today, they had won. An official government representative had arrived shortly after sunrise, a woman named Karen Doyle, mid-40s, tall and severe, with iron-gray hair pinned back in a no-nonsense bun and eyes the color of polished steel. Dressed in the crisp uniform of the Wildlife and Land Management Division, Doyle exuded authority. She had offered Wyatt a direct transfer back to the federal office. Desk work, full benefits, safer conditions. Wyatt had listened politely, the desert wind tugging at the frayed edges of his battered jacket. He had looked past Doyle's polished shoes to the scuffed paws of Ash, to the bruised yet defiant faces of Sam and Alara, to the vast open canvas of Redstone Canyons stretching endlessly behind them, and he had smiled, a real, slow, painful smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and set his bruised ribs throbbing. "No," Wyatt had said simply, "this is where I belong." Doyle had pressed, raising all the logical points. Better salary, medical leave, safety nets. Wyatt had only shaken his head, the desert sun glinting off the tarnished badge over his heart. "Out here," he said quietly, "is where the fight matters." When Doyle finally relented and drove away, leaving a cloud of government-issued dust behind her, Wyatt turned back to his friends, the strange, beautiful family the desert had carved from blood, loyalty, and the stubborn refusal to give up. That afternoon, plans began to take shape. In a dusty clearing not far from the old outpost, they stood together. Wyatt, Alara, Sam, Ash, Flint, Blaze, and Dusty, surveying the skeletal remains of an abandoned ranger station that would soon become something new, the Redstone Wildlife Rescue Center. Alara, practical to the core, had already begun sketching layouts in a battered leather notebook, kennels for the rescue dogs, holding pens for injured animals, a small field clinic for emergency treatment. Her handwriting was neat but slanted, the ink smudged where her fingers caught the page in her excitement. Sam talked logistics, supply lines, communication upgrades, volunteer networks. His sandy hair gleamed under the sun, and though his voice was calm and measured, there was a lilt to it now, a lightness that hadn't been there before. It was the sound of a man finally finding a purpose that healed as much as it demanded. Wyatt said little. He listened, nodded, offered short, decisive comments when needed. His strength was still rebuilding itself day by day, but inside, a deeper foundation was setting, one not so easily torn down by storms or betrayal. The dogs moved among them like living threads, weaving the small group together into something stronger. Flint, the silent guardian, sprawled at the center of the site, his massive frame an unmovable pillar. Blaze darted excitedly from one marked corner to another, as if overseeing construction himself. Dusty chased the wind, occasionally pausing to glance back and make sure no one strayed too far. And Ash stayed close to Wyatt, their bond now as solid as the sun-baked rocks that had witnessed it forged. In the days that followed, as they began clearing debris and setting up basic structures, word spread. Locals came, bringing tools, spare lumber, old fencing. Other rangers, hearing what had happened, offered supplies and hands. Even a few skeptical lawmen from neighboring towns sent quiet donations, a testament to the respect earned not just by the battle, but by the spirit behind it. At the edge of Redstone Canyons, a new kind of legacy was taking root, not built by conquest or greed, but by rescue, protection, and second chances. One evening, as twilight painted the rocks in hues of lavender and gold, Wyatt sat with Ash beneath a battered old sign that read, Ranger Station 14. He watched Alara hammer another plank into place while Sam argued good-naturedly with a carpenter about fencing angles. The air smelled of cedar shavings and fresh hope. Wyatt reached down and ruffled Ash's ears. The dog leaned into his touch, tail thumping gently against the packed earth. "Homeboy," Wyatt murmured. Ash lifted his head and stared into Wyatt's eyes. In that moment, no words were needed. Between them stretched a promise, unspoken, unbreakable, eternal. Out of dust and fire, they had built a family. And under the endless, unforgiving sun of Redstone Canyons, that family would endure. Sometimes, in the harshest deserts of life, when hope seems to wither under the blazing sun, God sends his miracles not through grand gestures, but through quiet, faithful hearts. In Wyatt's darkest hour, it was not an army or a rescue squad that saved him. It was loyalty, courage, and the silent, steadfast love of 4 dogs and a few ordinary souls who refused to walk away. It reminds us that in our own lives, when we feel abandoned or broken, miracles may come through unexpected hands, a kind word, a loyal friend, a silent prayer whispered when no one else knows our struggle. God does not always calm the storm. Sometimes, he sends someone to stand with you in the middle of it. If you believe that loyalty, love, and courage are gifts from above, and that no one is ever truly alone, then this story was meant for you. Please share this story with someone who needs a reminder that even in the hardest times, hope survives. Leave a comment to tell us how faith and loyalty have touched your life. And if you believe God watches over us all, even in the wildest deserts, comment Amen below. Do not forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories, and may God bless every heart that reads and believes.